Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are wrestling with, a really profound piece of writing.
It is a very dense and, I think, provocative diagnosis of our culture.
Yeah, exactly. It claims we're living through this huge shift it calls the revolution of the self.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To try and unpack what that actually looks like.
Right, to cut through the academic language, figure out where it came from and why this source believes it's changed, well, everything.
It's an ambitious piece of work. The author even starts with this almost world-weary quote from Ecclesiastes. In my vain life, I have seen everything.
That really sets the tone.
It does. It signals that this isn't just a complaint. It's an attempt to build an intellectual roadmap, to understand the mechanism of how this revolution took its current shape.
And the author shows right away that the symptoms are just everywhere. He even says he had to skip over tons of examples just to stay focused.
Precisely. And maybe before we get into the three he did focus on, we should just touch on the scope of what he's describing, this rejection of the past for the sake of the present.
Okay, yeah. Let's start with a really visual example he gives. Architecture.
Yeah.
The source suggests that a lot of modern architecture has an aesthetic appeal that's, well, as short-lived as its own materials.
It's a perfect visual metaphor, isn't it? Buildings for the now, with no real thought for legacy or permanence.
And you see the same idea in modern art.
Oh, absolutely. It's often this calculated repudiation of old forms, of past ideas of beauty. It's like arguing the old standards were just wrong.
That feeling then bleeds into our politics.
For sure. The source talks about this crisis of confidence in the nation-state.
It's being eaten away from the inside by individualism and from the outside by globalization, which kind of makes governments feel a bit powerless on the big stuff.
And when the state can't provide that stable identity, people turn inward. They turn outward onto a public stage.
Which brings us to this idea of life as performance art.
I mean, you see it on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, reality television. It's all about expressing your inner thoughts no matter how crude they are. And that expression is seen as the ultimate sign of authenticity.
Which then directly shapes how our elites behave.
It does. The source gives a specific example of politicians using profanity. It's not a mistake, it's a performance.
A performance of integrity, strangely enough, to show they're real.
It's a total loss of that old idea of public reserve, of discipline. Think about it. A few decades ago, expletive deleted in a transcript was a scandal.
Now, that kind of discipline is almost suspicious.
Exactly. And, openness about sexual preferences, especially those that are, as the source puts it, lionized by the culture's mood, that's now an electoral asset.
It's proof that you're an authentic, liberated self, a complete reversal.
A profound one. So despite all those examples, art, the state, politics, the author really zeroes in on three areas to make his case.
Right, the three pillars. First, the triumph of the erotic in pop culture. Second, the triumph of expressive individualism and therapeutic ideas in law and education. And third, the triumph of transgenderism, which he sees as the kind of logical next step for the whole sexual revolution.
And the key point is that none of these are separate issues.
Not at all. That's the central insight. They're all symptoms of a larger, interconnected cultural whole. They all feed each other.
So this cultural whole is defined by a kind of checklist of pathologies, right? I think there were 5 of them.
Yes, 5 core interconnected ones, and understanding them is the foundation of the whole diagnosis.
Can you walk us through them quickly?
Of course. So first you have individualism, the personal self over the community. Second, this psychologized view of reality, meaning our inner feelings define what's real. Third is therapeutic ideals, where the goal of life is just emotional well-being, not virtue or duty. Fourth is cultural amnesia. We forget why old rules existed. And finally, pansexuality.
Where sexual identity is seen as the absolute key to who you are. Exactly. The key to personal liberation.
That framework makes the connections much clearer. The source really stresses you can't understand one issue without seeing the whole web.
Right. And the best example he uses for this is same-sex marriage. You can't just see it as a modern political debate.
You have to trace the philosophical journey that led to the legal judgments, the ones before the big Supreme Court ruling.
Truthfully. The Obergefell decision wasn't an isolated event. It was the inevitable legal endpoint once therapeutic concerns and expressive individualism won out over older ideas.
But the analysis has to go back even further than that, right?
Much further. You have to look at the thinkers who first changed how we even thought about the self.
The intellectual godfathers of the revolution.
That's a good way to put it. We're talking about people like Rousseau, who championed individual feeling. Then the Romantics, Marx,
Right, and Freud.
and especially Freud, who really gave us this idea that we're driven by repressed desires. That's what gives the therapeutic idea so much cultural power today.
And that's the thread, from 18th century philosophy all the way to a 21st century court ruling.
That's the thread. Now, this all leads the author to adopt a very specific term for our era.
The Riefian perspective.
Yes, from the sociologist Philip Rieff. He argues that what we're living in is an anti-culture.
Which is a really strong word. What does he mean by that?
An anti-culture, in this sense, is a culture that defines itself by what it tears down. It's a repudiation of all the old rules and regulations, especially around sexual ethics.
But it's not just about rejecting the rules themselves, is it? It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. The real rejection is of the source of the rules, of any sacred order or transcendent foundation they might have been based on.
So that means rejecting formal religion like Christianity, but also, what, philosophical systems?
Right. Things like Kant's objective moral framework. If you get rid of the sacred foundation, all the rules that follow just look like arbitrary inventions that get in the way of my self-expression.
So without realizing it, the West basically accepted the challenge from Nietzsche's madman.
Exactly. The terrifying task of remaking all value and meaning after the death of God. If there's no external truth, then we have to create meaning ourselves.
And the practical result of rejecting all that authority
Is a rejection of history itself, a rejection of anything that might challenge the desires of the present self. And the clearest example of this
is the favoring of fluid concepts like gender identity over the physical reality of the body.
precisely. The inner feeling becomes more real, more authoritative than objective biology. That is the self's complete triumph.
So we've laid out the philosophy, but this isn't just some academic game, is it? The source is very clear on that.
Emphatically not. The revolution of the self is now, as he puts it, the revolution of us all. It affects everyone's daily life.
That universal reach is the critical part.
It is. I mean, Supreme Court judgments change the landscape for everyone, but it goes so much deeper into our private lives.
You mean things like the availability of pornography?
Yes. The source points out that pornography isn't just images. It communicates a powerful philosophy about sex, about relationships, about what human beings are for.
And it shapes the expectations of millions of people without them ever reading a single philosophy text.
And then you have the ethics of someone like Peter Singer. The source uses him as a kind of yardstick.
To measure how far this worldview has seeped into our institutions.
Exactly. And what's so sobering is that his arguments, which challenge the unique value of human life, are only really plausible in a world that already sort of sees humans as just another kind of animal.
A highly evolved animal, maybe, but an animal nonetheless.
Right. And if that's all we are, then ethics just becomes a calculation of utility and suffering, not inherent dignity.
And that way of thinking directly impacts real-world policies.
Absolutely. Healthcare policies for the very young, the very old. It has huge practical consequences.
And coming back to one of the author's main pillars, transgenderism is positioned to change, well, everything. Notions of privacy, sports.
Even the very language we all use day to day. It's a total cultural transformation. There's no escaping it.
But the source ends with a pretty serious warning about the long-term stability of all this.
A very serious one. The argument is that, historically, no culture that has had to justify itself by itself without any external or sacred order has ever lasted for very long.
It leads to what's called cultural entropy.
Yes, a kind of degeneration. Because if the self is the highest authority, there's nothing authoritative left to pass on to the next generation. Why should my child accept my self-created values? They'll just create their own.
So this anti-culture is inherently unstable, especially when it's up against external challenges.
That's the ultimate fear expressed in the text. When this culture of radical self-expression faces ideologically committed challenges from places like Russia or China, from Islam, or even from online political movements, it looks fragile. It looks unconvincing.
There's one last quote you wanted to end on from Leszek Kuczykowski.
Yes, it's a chilling observation that sums up the risk. He basically says that when a civilization uses rationality to destroy its own taboos, it erodes its ability to survive.
Because taboos are like necessary guardrails, built by instinct, not by planning.
Exactly. And if we rationalize them all away, we're left just hoping that our social self-preservation drive kicks in, and that the reaction to the vacuum isn't something, in his words, barbarous.
It's a terrifying thought that what fills the vacuum left by the self's victory could be far worse than what was there before.
It really is.
Well, that is certainly a lot to process. Our goal with this deep dive was really to provide that intellectual roadmap, to explain the revolution of the self, its roots, and its consequences, just as the source laid them out.
We've traced the causes and symptoms, from architecture all the way to geopolitics.
And we'll leave you with a final thought, taken directly from the author. He notes that we are all, to some extent, complicit in this cultural condition.
So the question to think about is this: what does that complicity look like in your own life, in the entertainment you choose, the way you speak, and things you value? And what responses might be necessary as we face a future where the very idea of authority has been so radically redefined by the self? Think about that until the next time we dive deep.